Welcome to a case that remains etched in the annals of Japanese history as the largest investigation ever undertaken. While many may be familiar with the details, today we present a fresh perspective on this haunting story. In the quiet neighborhood of Setagaya, the year 2000 heralded unexpected changes. Urbanization and Tokyo's relentless expansion began to reshape lives, setting the stage for a tragedy that would leave an indelible mark on the community. Families that had once thrived on this bustling street were now witnessing a transformation, their lives intertwined with the fierce competition of modernity. However, on December 30th, 2000, as residents prepared to welcome the new year, a gruesome crime would shatter their tranquility forever. The Setagaya family, comprised of 4 members, was at the heart of this unfolding horror. 44-year-old father Mikio Miyazawa, his wife, 41-year-old Yasuko Miyazawa, their 8-year-old daughter Nina, and their 6-year-old son Rei formed a close-knit family. Once surrounded by a vibrant neighborhood, they found themselves increasingly isolated as the century turned. With many neighbors selling their homes, the Setagaya family stood as one of the last remaining households in an area that had seen better days. Their residence, appearing as a single large house, was in fact 2 adjoining homes. One was occupied by the Miyazawa family, while the other belonged to Yasuko's family, mainly her mother, who welcomed visits from Yasuko's younger sister and brother-in-law. Recognizing the need for more space, the Setagaya family had plans in motion to move after selling their land to the city, which intended to expand its reach. Yet, the evening of December 30th would bring a chilling turn of events. On that fateful day, Yasuko had hesitated to finalize their move, concerned about the impact of a new home on their children, particularly Rei, who faced developmental challenges. As a dedicated tutor, Yasuko understood the vital importance of stability for education. In the nearby Setagaya Park, she contemplated the best course of action, torn between the promise of a new beginning and the comfort of familiarity that her children needed. To those who knew the Setagaya family, they were a hard-working, respected presence in the community. However, everything changed that night. After a day spent shopping for New Year's celebrations, the Setagaya family returned home, enjoying a simple evening of dinner and television before surrendering to sleep. What transpired in the hours that followed would baffle investigators for decades, leaving many details shrouded in mystery. Based on what little we know, events began to unfold after 11 p.m., leading to a tragedy that would forever alter the lives of those in Setagaya and beyond. As the clock ticked toward midnight, the serenity of the Setagaya home would be shattered, plunging the neighborhood into a nightmare that would ultimately become part of Japan's most notorious unsolved crimes. The chilling events that unfolded that fateful night have baffled investigators for decades, with many details remaining speculative. However, based on the evidence available, this is the harrowing account of what transpired shortly after 11 p.m. On December 30th, under the cover of darkness, a man approached the Setagaya family's home through the nearby Setagaya Park. With malicious intent, he scaled the backyard fence and climbed up to the second-floor bathroom window. Once he reached the open window, the intruder removed the protective screen and stealthily entered the house. After exiting the bathroom, the perpetrator moved swiftly into the nearest bedroom, 6-year-old Rei's room, where the innocent child slept soundly in his bed. In a horrific act, the perpetrator strangled Rei to death, leaving his lifeless body on the bed. Rei was tragically the only victim to suffer this fate. The killer then shifted his focus to Mikio, the father, who was awake and working on the first floor at that time. However, the ensuing events remained shrouded in uncertainty. Some reports indicate that Mikio, alerted by strange noises from upstairs, rushed to confront the intruder. Upon encountering Mikio, the murderer brandished a sashimi knife, an instrument typically used for slicing seafood. A brutal struggle ensued as the killer stabbed Mikio multiple times while he fought back valiantly. During the chaos, some accounts suggest that Mikio stumbled down the stairs, succumbing to blood loss from his numerous stab wounds. Yet, other sources claim that the attack continued on the first floor, leading to Mikio's demise. Allegedly, Mikio attempted to flee up the stairs, but collapsed before reaching the top, tragically falling back down to the first floor where he ultimately perished. A telling piece of evidence, a single slipper belonging to Mikio, was discovered on the staircase. His lifeless body was found lying at the bottom of the stairs, riddled with stab wounds, a fragment of the sashimi knife grotesquely embedded in his skull. The final victims of this ruthless assailant were Yasuko and Nina, who were both asleep in the loft. The specifics of their murders remain largely unconfirmed, but it is believed that the mother and daughter were attacked in their slumber, as indicated by bloodstains on their futon mattress. At some point during the heinous act, the perpetrator discarded the broken sashimi knife and instead retrieved a conventional Western-style knife from the family's kitchen to continue the brutal killings. In their desperate attempt to escape the loft, Yasuko and Nina tried to navigate the foldable staircase connecting the loft to the main house, but their efforts were in vain. Their bodies were later discovered on the second floor, huddled closely together at the top of the staircase, with Nina's body showing signs of extreme trauma, including missing teeth, indicating she had not only been stabbed, but also beaten. Forensic evidence suggests that Nina was the last to succumb to the brutality of the attacker. What set this case apart, transforming it into a media sensation, was not merely the shocking brutality of the killings, but also the chilling aftermath. After cold-bloodedly executing a family of 4, including 2 innocent children, remarkably, the perpetrator chose not to flee the scene. Initially, investigators believed he remained inside the house for a minimum of 2 hours. However, later evidence hinted that he might have lingered for as long as 10 hours after committing the brutal murders. During this time, he engaged in a series of unsettling activities. He used the family's computer, consumed their food, tended to his wounds, and searched through their belongings. While the precise order of these events is still debated, the actions he undertook during this period are crucial to piecing together the case. This bizarre behavior led to the case being labeled the Goldilocks murder. This term typically describes peculiar break-ins where the intruder not only steals but also indulges in unusual behavior, such as eating and sleeping in the victim's home before departing. Based on the evidence retrieved from the scene, investigators meticulously reconstructed the timeline of events following the murders. The killer, remarkably unperturbed, walked past the lifeless bodies of the family members and made his way directly to the kitchen. He plundered the refrigerator, taking several containers of ice cream, along with some barley tea and, according to various sources, even melon. He began to eat mere minutes after committing the heinous act, and disturbingly, he chose not to use a spoon. Instead, he squeezed the containers. With a grotesque disregard for cleanliness, he pushed the ice cream upward and bit into it directly, leaving behind a trail of saliva and fingerprints all over the kitchen. While indulging in his meal, the killer discovered the family's first aid kit and utilized it to bandage a cut on his hand. This injury had been sustained during the chaotic attack. After dressing his wound, he callously discarded the blood-stained bandages, providing law enforcement with a valuable blood sample for later analysis. Once he finished in the kitchen, the perpetrator moved on to the storage room on the first floor. With a calculated demeanor, he rummaged through the family's documents before pulling out a drawer filled with them. He then carried the drawer upstairs to the second-floor bathroom, where he callously dumped its contents into the bathtub, an act that only deepened the mystery surrounding his intentions. In a disturbingly casual manner, he also used the toilet in that same bathroom, neglecting to flush. After wiping his hands on a towel, he left behind bloodstains that would later serve as critical evidence. Some reports even suggest that the killer took a moment to rest, curling up on the family's sofa. This detail remains a significant point of contention among investigators. What is clear, however, is that at some stage, the perpetrator chose to discard his jacket, hat, shirt, and scarf. These items, along with 2 handkerchiefs, were left behind in a chilling testament to his presence. At the scene, a hip bag and a pair of black gloves were also left behind, alongside both weapons, the sashimi knife he had brought with him and the kitchen knife he switched to during the assault. While the exact sequence of these events remains fiercely debated, one fact stands out clearly. At 1:00 a.m., the family's computer logs revealed that the killer activated Mikio's computer and created a new folder. Although this action remains unconfirmed, it signals a chilling sense of normalcy amid the horror that had just unfolded. Authorities believed that the perpetrator had turned to the internet, visiting the website of a local theater company. The computer logs revealed access around 10:00 a.m. In the early phases of the investigation, police relied on these logs to estimate the duration of the intruder's presence in the house. Investigators confirmed that the computer was accessed once at 1:00 a.m. and again around 10:00 a.m. Initially, they theorized that the killer had remained undetected in the house for nearly 10 hours after committing the gruesome murders. Amid the chaos of the crime scene, surrounded by the 4 bodies he had left behind, further investigation suggested that the morning access to the computer might have been accidental, potentially triggered by a mere brush of the mouse by the killer. Witness accounts indicated that the killer likely stayed in the house for at least 2 hours, departing sometime between 1 o'clock a.m. and dawn, around 10 o'clock a.m. the following morning. Haruko, Yasuko's mother, lived next door and grew concerned after receiving no response from the family. When she opened the door and stepped inside, she was met with an unimaginable horror: the lifeless body of her son-in-law at the foot of the stairs. Overwhelmed by shock, she immediately dialed the police. When law enforcement arrived at the scene, they were confronted with the grim reality of 4 bodies and a staggering amount of physical evidence: fingerprints, shoe prints, DNA from blood samples, discarded clothing belonging to the killer, and even his unflushed feces in the bathroom. Many believed that the path to solving this case would be straightforward. A former high-ranking official remarked that the crime scene resembled a treasure trove of evidence, and it seemed that the killer would be apprehended in no time. Yet, as the years unfolded, this assumption proved to be tragically misguided. When the nearby Setagaya police and later the Tokyo Metropolitan Police arrived, their immediate task was to meticulously collect and process every piece of evidence left behind. Given the overwhelming amount of physical evidence, this was no simple endeavor. Running fingerprints, analyzing DNA samples, and tracing the origins of the discarded clothing became a long and grueling process. However, as each piece of evidence was scrutinized, investigators began to construct a remarkably clear image of the perpetrator. Crucially, the abandoned clothing provided police with a surprisingly detailed depiction of what the killer had looked like on the night of the crime. Details about where he had purchased his clothing and even the type of cologne he wore created a highly specific description that could be distributed to potential witnesses in the vicinity. With this vital information in hand, investigators determined that the killer had been dressed in a gray Crusher bucket hat, a white baseball jersey with purple sleeves, a cheap plaid scarf lacking a brand label, a Uniqlo AirTech jacket, black gloves, and a dark gray hip bag, with footprints left at the scene providing further clues. Investigators meticulously analyzed the crime scene and determined that the killer had donned a distinctive gray Crusher bucket hat. He wore a white baseball jersey with purple sleeves, an inexpensive plaid scarf devoid of any brand label, a Uniqlo AirTech jacket, black gloves, and a dark gray hip bag. These details emerged from the footprints left behind, painting a clearer picture of the assailant. Investigators managed to identify the suspect's footwear, Slazenger sneakers, size 27.5 cm, roughly equivalent to a U.S. size 9.5. Armed with this precise visual profile, they were ready to delve deeper into the investigation. The focus then shifted to the murder weapons and the DNA evidence strewn across the crime scene. In the realm of homicide investigations, the presence of the perpetrator's DNA is often the linchpin in solving the case. The killer of the Miyazawa family left his genetic material in abundance: saliva, hair, blood, and even feces. While this appeared to be a treasure trove for investigators, Japan's legal system imposed stringent regulations on DNA evidence. In his podcast on the case, investigative journalist Nicholas O'Brien revealed insights from multiple law enforcement officers in Japan. He uncovered that all DNA testing and analysis from crime scenes is conducted by a specialized internal division. This division is bound by law to withhold DNA test results from public disclosure. Such a policy aligns with Japan's strict personal information protection laws, which restrict the sharing of personal data without consent. Consequently, any information regarding the suspect's DNA testing or genetic profile that surfaced in the media was likely leaked only after meticulous analysis of the available evidence. Initial conclusions drawn by investigators suggested that the suspect was likely between 15 and 35 years old. He required sufficient physical strength to access the second-floor window of the Miyazawa home. Estimates indicated he stood around 5 feet 7 inches, or 170 centimeters tall, and had a relatively slim build. The 32-inch waist strap of the hip bag he left behind suggested he was male with blood type A. Analysis of his feces revealed his last meal contained string beans and sesame seeds. However, when police checked his fingerprints, they found no matches, indicating the perpetrator had no prior criminal record. With a wealth of information about the killer's clothing and DNA profile, police released sketches and details to the public, hoping for a breakthrough. Yet, as days turned into months, the perpetrator remained elusive. In an effort to jog public memory, the police even circulated a document that highlighted significant events from that year. The clothing worn by the suspect consisted of common items readily available, and the fingerprint evidence yielded no matches in Japan. Each lead that emerged ultimately failed to bring investigators any closer to identifying the suspect. In a desperate attempt to trigger a witness's recollection, television programs aired on the night of the crime. Despite an overwhelming amount of physical evidence left behind, investigators faced a daunting challenge. Much of it was unremarkable. That changed when two crucial pieces of clothing came into play, providing the police with vital leads. These items were the killer's shoes and hip bag, each helping to narrow the focus of the ongoing investigation. With these new leads in hand, investigators felt a renewed sense of hope, determined to piece together the puzzle that had haunted them for far too long. The investigation took a pivotal turn when police uncovered that the size 27.5 centimeter Slazenger sneakers worn by the killer had never been sold in Japan. Instead, these specific shoes had been available in South Korea. This collaboration allowed investigators to narrow the suspect pool, concluding that the perpetrator must have either lived in or visited South Korea at some point. However, under South Korean law, all citizens over the age of 17 must have their fingerprints on file. In Japan, all visitors are required to provide fingerprints upon entry, stored in a national database. Aware that the shoes had originated from South Korea, Japanese authorities sought the cooperation of the South Korean government. Investigators compared the fingerprints found at the crime scene against the national database, yet once again, they found no matches, leading the investigation into yet another dead end. The second piece of clothing that was analyzed was the hip bag. In a significant development, the examination of a hip bag expanded the investigation beyond Japan and reached into the United States. Inside the bag, investigators discovered skateboard grip tape, traces of the popular men's cologne, Drakkar Noir, and a small amount of sand. Upon further analysis, it was revealed that the sand did not originate from Japan, but was traced back to Los Angeles, California. Additionally, police learned that only 130 of the killer's shirts had ever been manufactured and sold, yet they managed to track down only 12 of the buyers. This revelation completely disrupted the police's initial theories regarding the identity of the perpetrator, effectively sending them back to square one in their investigation. As time passed and more clues emerged, the case grew increasingly convoluted. Each new discovery added layers of complexity, sometimes illuminating the path forward and other times deepening the mystery. For instance, early in the investigation, while interviewing residents in the vicinity of the crime scene, a taxi driver reported picking up 3 men that night. These men matched the estimated age and build of the suspected killer, and notably the driver recalled that one of them appeared to be injured. This man had left behind a bloodstain on the back seat of the taxi. While the evidence from the house strongly suggested a singular killer, the presence of these 3 men introduced an unsettling complexity into the case. Moreover, witness testimony revealed that the day after the murders, nurses and staff at a medical center near Tobu-Nikko Station, located a few hours north of Saitama, encountered a man around 30 years old. He arrived with a severe hand injury. The nurses recalled that the wound was so deep that they could see bone. Despite their persistent inquiries about how he sustained such an injury, the man refused to provide an explanation and left abruptly. This encounter prompted the staff to alert the police after they learned about the Miyazawa family murders. Amid the chaos of the investigation, a perplexing detail emerged. 2 handkerchiefs found at the scene. One remained intact, while the other bore a hole cut in its center. In their quest for answers, police appealed to the public, seeking insights into the peculiar alteration. The detectives, sifting through the responses, began to piece together the significance of the handkerchief with the hole. One handkerchief was pristine, while the other was marred by a deliberate cut. Initially, authorities reached out to the community for any information regarding the reason behind such a modification. As responses flooded in, detectives speculated that the handkerchief with the hole may have been employed to grip the handle of a knife. This technique is commonly practiced by fishermen when they cut large fish such as tuna, as it allows for a more secure hold on the blade. Yet, other theories surfaced, suggesting that the handkerchiefs were utilized to prevent leaving fingerprints. The second handkerchief, investigators theorized, might have served as a makeshift mask, obscuring the killer's identity. However, a glaring inconsistency remained. If the murderer aimed to avoid leaving fingerprints, why were his prints found scattered throughout the house? Such contradictions left investigators in a perpetual state of confusion for years. This confusion stymied progress, diminishing the likelihood of ever apprehending the perpetrator. Despite the trove of evidence, only a handful of theories emerged regarding the Miyazawa family. Determining a motive for the heinous crime proved nearly impossible. The Miyazawas were a well-liked family, with no known disputes or grievances, certainly none that could justify the brutal murder of all 4 family members. With a wealth of evidence but no viable suspects, police found themselves compelled to rethink their strategy. In cases like this, the initial theory often revolves around a botched burglary, yet far too many elements of this crime clashed with that notion. Typically, burglars target homes when they believe the occupants are away. The fact that the killer chose to assault the Miyazawa residence in the evening, when all 4 family members were likely present, cast serious doubt on the burglary theory. Moreover, the killer's first act upon entering was to murder the youngest child, who posed the least threat. If theft had been the primary objective, the intruder would have likely sought out valuables first. Instead, the assailant's initial move was to creep into Ray's room while he slept, ultimately strangling him to death. Only after the entire family lay lifeless did the intruder make any attempt to raid the home for valuables. Even then, the intruder left most valuables untouched or carelessly discarded into the bathtub. Reports suggested he absconded with approximately 150,000 yen, equivalent to around $1,500, while other accounts indicated that a larger sum of approximately $2,000 remained undisturbed at the scene. These findings led investigators to conclude that theft was not the driving force behind the brutal murders, as the perpetrator displayed an alarming indifference toward the evidence left in his wake. In a chilling analysis, investigators speculated that the brutality of the murders might point to a serial killer or an individual suffering from severe mental illness, harboring homicidal tendencies. This theory gained traction due to the complete lack of remorse exhibited by the killer, who treated the Miyazawa family home as if it were his own, all while the lifeless bodies lay scattered throughout. The most harrowing aspect of the crime was the extreme violence inflicted upon the female victims. Yasuko Miyazawa's wounds told a grim story of a woman who fought valiantly against her attacker until the very end, suffering grievous injuries in the process. Tragically, Nina, the youngest victim, endured multiple deep stab wounds. Her injuries suggested that even in death, she was not spared from the killer's wrath. The severity of the violence directed at these women raised the unsettling possibility that the killer harbored a particular animosity towards them. Admittedly, the theory of a serial killer seemed far-fetched at first glance. However, it aligned disturbingly well with early witness accounts, notably from a taxi driver who transported 3 men shortly after the murders, men whose descriptions matched that of the suspect, one of whom bore a noticeable hand injury upon entering the vehicle. The killer's savage assault on Yasuko continued unabated, resulting in tooth loss and severe hemorrhaging. Analysts noted the excessive brutality, suggesting that the killer may have harbored deep-seated hatred towards women, specifically targeting them in this violent outburst. Beyond theft or the actions of a serial killer, investigators considered the possibility of a revenge killing or personal vendetta. Yet, the primary issue with this theory was the undeniable fact that the Miyazawa family was well loved within their community. Close friends and colleagues described Mikio Miyazawa as a sociable man who fostered good relationships with everyone, hardly the type to attract enemies who could incite such a cold-blooded massacre. The only reported conflict before the tragic events was a noise complaint filed by Mikio against a group of local skateboarders, an incident that occurred just days prior to the murders. This complaint became a focal point in early theories, suggesting that the skateboarders, enraged by Mikio's actions, might have sought revenge by targeting his entire family in a senseless act of violence. Speculation arose that these 3 individuals may have been familiar faces at the nearby skate park. It was theorized that while one man entered the home to commit the heinous act, the other 2 stood as lookouts, ensuring their escape. This theory found further support in the evidence uncovered at the crime scene. Abandoned clothing discovered nearby matched the style typically worn by skateboarders, and a fanny pack left behind contained remnants of grip tape used for skateboards. Yet, despite interviewing local skateboarders at Setagaya Park around the time of the murders, no significant leads surfaced. The motive behind such a brutal slaughter remained elusive. rendering it difficult for both investigators and the public to accept that this senseless act could stem from such a trivial trigger. However, the most peculiar and widely discussed theory emerged from an unexpected piece of evidence: the nearly insignificant amount of sand found in the killer's fanny pack. As the investigation unfolded, the police found themselves grappling with a lack of significant leads. The motive appeared trivial, casting doubt in the minds of both investigators and the public. How could such an insignificant reason justify the brutal slaughter of 4 innocent lives? The prevailing theory, however, emerged from an unexpected source: the nearly negligible amount of sand discovered in the killer's fanny pack. This peculiar detail intrigued detectives, leading them to consider its implications. The fanny pack discovered at the crime scene contained a small amount of sand, which, when analyzed, traced back to California, specifically an area just north of Los Angeles. This curious detail raised an unsettling question: why would the killer possess sand from such a distant location? How did this sand end up in Setagaya, Japan? For many, the answer lay within one of the most contentious pieces of evidence in the case: the DNA profile extracted from blood samples left at the crime scene. From the onset of the investigation, police scrutinized the DNA remnants left behind by the killer, constructing a profile that revealed insights into his ancestry. The results indicated that the perpetrator was of mixed heritage. His mother likely hailed from southern Europe, while his father bore East Asian descent. Although the father's DNA markers did not specify a particular country, they revealed genetic traits present in 1 out of every 13 Japanese individuals, 1 in 10 Chinese, and 1 in 4 Koreans. These 2 pieces of evidence ignited the imaginations of detectives and amateur sleuths alike, prompting countless theories over the years, each more elaborate than the last. To distill the complexity, we must examine 2 key elements of the case: the origin of the sand and the killer's mixed ethnicity. This analysis brought forth one of the most widely discussed theories: that the killer was likely a military serviceman. How did investigators arrive at this conclusion? It all centered around the sand. As previously established, the composition of the sand indicated it originated from California's Mojave Desert, specifically matching the sand surrounding Edwards Air Force Base. Detectives theorized that while stationed at the airbase, the killer had picked up this sand, which eventually found its way into the fanny pack at the murder scene. After his service in the U.S. military, it is believed he was transferred to Japan, potentially to serve at Yokota Air Base, a military installation alarmingly close to the Miyazawa home, just an hour's drive away. However, for this theory to be credible, the killer, now identified as a member of the U.S. military, would need a working knowledge of Japanese. This assertion is supported by evidence suggesting he was capable of deciphering documents to discern which ones to discard into the bathtub and which to leave untouched. For this theory to gain traction, it was crucial to establish that the killer was likely a member of the U.S. military. Evidence suggested he possessed the ability to read Japanese, allowing him to discern which documents to toss into the bathtub and which to leave behind. Though the possibility existed that the killer randomly discarded documents, the mixed ancestry detail added complexity to the case. Some speculated that the assailant might have been the offspring of a soldier who married a foreigner during his deployment. This background could mean that, while not a full-time resident of Japan, he learned the language from his parents and potentially visited Japan during his childhood, enabling him to navigate the country with ease. This intricate theory wove together various pieces of evidence. The notion that the killer was a military serviceman aligned with the physical strength exhibited during the attack. The severity of the injuries inflicted on the Miyazawa family suggested a calculated brutality. Investigators speculated that the killer, potentially of mixed foreign descent, may have grown up in a different country, leading to a lack of records with the Japanese government. Yet his Japanese heritage hinted that he was not only fluent in the language, but might have visited Japan with his Japanese parent. This familiarity with the area and language allowed him to remain undetected in the house for hours after the murders, planning his escape with chilling precision. This theory quickly garnered attention, connecting various pieces of evidence and captivating the media and online communities. However, it was not the only theory to emerge. Another narrative took shape, one that intertwined military connections and DNA evidence, drawing the interest of the public. Years later, journalist Fumiya Ichihashi, under a pseudonym, presented a new theory in his book, The Setagaya family murder case, 15 years of new facts. He proposed that the killer was a former member of the South Korean military, transformed into a hitman hired by developers of the neighborhood where the Miyazawa family resided. Ichihashi's research pointed to DNA analysis, suggesting that the killer carried markers significantly more common in Korean DNA than in Japanese. This background would have endowed the assailant with the strength and tactical skills necessary to execute such a meticulously planned crime. What set this theory apart was its potential motive. The Miyazawa family, after selling their land, hesitated to move due to concerns about their children's adjustment. They remained one of the last families in the neighborhood, which Ichihashi argued may have frustrated the developers to the point of hiring a hitman to eliminate them and expedite construction. Ichihashi highlighted several pieces of evidence supporting this theory, including the killer's military background, which could explain the presence of sand discovered in a fanny pack at the crime scene. Moreover, the DNA findings revealed markers that were more prevalent among South Korean citizens, along with the origin of the Schlesinger sneakers worn by the assailant, which were exclusively sold in South Korea. Yet, this theory also raised numerous unanswered questions. Why would a hitman linger in the victim's home for hours after the brutal crime, leaving behind a trail of DNA evidence? The ferocity of the attacks suggested a personal vendetta rather than the detached execution of a hired killer. The wounds inflicted upon the family members appeared almost intimate, betraying a deeper rage. Additionally, despite thorough investigations, fingerprints collected from the scene were cross-referenced with South Korea's database, yielding no matches. The wounds inflicted upon the family indicated a personal vendetta, rather than the calculated nature of a hired assassin. Compounding the mystery, the fingerprints collected from the scene were cross-referenced with South Korea's database, yielding no matches. The implications were staggering. The killer either had never been born in South Korea, had never set foot there, or had somehow eluded the stringent legal biometric requirements for years. Investigative journalist Nicholas O'Brien, a key figure in this case, delved into a theory that seemed almost too outrageous to consider during his podcast, Faceless. In a shocking proposition, O'Brien suggested that the murderer of the Miyazawa family could have been a child or a teenager. While this idea appeared far-fetched at first glance, there existed evidence that lent credence to his claims. Central to this was a suspicious post on 2channel, an anonymous text-based Japanese site that has since been rebranded as 5chan. A user had posted on this platform asserting knowledge about the Miyazawa case, which only deepened the mystery surrounding this theory and sparked further inquiries into the true identity of the killer. O'Brien's theory, previously highlighted in his podcast Faceless, painted a chilling picture. The notion that a child or teenager could be behind such a heinous act was troubling, yet it was not without support. The evidence, particularly the unsettling post on 2channel, reinforced this idea. This post was authored by a user who claimed to be a 13-year-old boy using the alias Koramutsu. It appeared at the tail end of a lengthy discussion where users recounted their own experiences with acts of cruelty toward animals. The chilling words of this young user resonated deeply. "Now, when I see the happy family next door," he expressed, "I want to do something like that." He further revealed his dark intentions, stating, "The Oita family murder case had a deadline of December 31st at 11:59 p.m. I'm thinking of killing them before the 21st century arrives." The Oita family murder case, referenced in his post, bore eerie similarities to the tragic events that befell the Miyazawa family. In that instance, a family was brutally attacked with a knife in their home at night, resulting in 3 fatalities and 3 others left in critical condition. The perpetrator, it would later be revealed, was a mere 15 years old. This crime occurred during a period when juvenile delinquency was alarmingly on the rise, marking a disturbing trend as the century drew to a close. The author of the post spoke about the Oita killings with a disconcerting level of excitement, expressing a desire to replicate the horror inflicted on the happy family next door. What made the situation even more unsettling was the timing of the post, which was made on December 27, 2000, just 2 days before the heinous murders of the Miyazawa family. The anonymity of the original poster complicated matters further. There was no way to ascertain whether the happy family next door he referred to was indeed the Miyazawa family, or if any of his chilling claims held truth. Yet, investigators could not dismiss this theory out of hand. If the killer was indeed a child, It would account for the absence of fingerprints in criminal databases, making the tracing of his identity through conventional means virtually impossible. Just 2 days prior to the tragic murders of the Miyazawa family, an anonymous poster had shared unsettling information online. However, the poster's identity remained elusive, leaving investigators unable to confirm whether his references to a neighboring family pertained to the Miyazawa family or if any of his claims held truth. Despite these uncertainties, the theory garnered consideration from the investigative team. If the killer had been a child, it would illuminate the absence of fingerprints in any criminal databases, rendering him untraceable through conventional means. This chilling theory aligns with claims suggesting that the killer's last meal comprised green beans and sesame seeds, a dish commonly prepared by mothers for their children. This detail raises unsettling questions about the perpetrator's possible continued dependence on his mother. Yet this theory sharply contradicts various pieces of evidence. The presence of sand from Edwards Air Force Base discovered in the killer's bag, alongside the extraordinary physical strength exhibited by a mere 13-year-old boy, who managed to scale a backyard wall and commit such a brutal act against an entire family, casts significant doubt on this narrative. Those familiar with the case generally dismiss this theory outright, irrespective of its potential validity. Nevertheless, a faction of the public has embraced these speculative narratives, expanding them further. With no suspects and no concrete leads, the police found themselves compelled to consider every story that surfaced. In their desperate search for information, authorities resorted to offering a staggering reward of 20 million yen, nearly 190,000, for any details leading to the arrest of the murderer. This marked the largest reward ever issued by Japanese police, igniting a massive investigation that would stretch over many years. Today, a grieving 93-year-old Haruko, the grandmother of the Miyazawa family, still stands at the precipice of hope, awaiting answers. Trapped in her sorrow, she occupies a position at the entrance of Chitose Karasuyama Station in Setagaya, Tokyo, distributing flyers in a poignant plea that even after 24 long years, someone might possess information to bring her son's killer to justice. Since that fateful night, a dedicated officer from the Tokyo Metropolitan Police Department has maintained a constant vigil outside the Miyazawa home. The road leading to the house was also barricaded in 2010, following public outcry and an urgent call for respect towards the victims. Japan abolished the statute of limitations for murder and other crimes that result in death, allowing for the possibility of prosecution even now. However, after 24 years, with an astounding 16,000 pieces of evidence, 15,000 leads, and over 250,000 investigators involved, this case has morphed into the largest investigation in Japanese history, yet it remains shrouded in mystery. What are your thoughts on this haunting case? Do you believe the Japanese police have conducted a thorough investigation, or do you have a theory of your own regarding the identity of the killer? Share your insights in the comments below. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you next time.